there's a shot that the Gemara that they were even able to eat truma d'oraisa. They were allowed to eat truma d'oraisa, but not kosher. So I'm not understanding what your question is.
Which kohen is allowed to eat trim but is not allowed to eat?
Well, this was an unusual situation, right? They were not treated like regular kohanim.
Right.
They're half treated like I'm half not. And the Gemara says since they weren't treated like regular, normally you might hold that mylin nesis kapayim liyusin. Normally, if they see a kohen duchens, automatically we could say he's a kohen yuchas. But over there, since it was a mod nazach, they were able to do certain things, and not other things. They're special. We weren't worried.
In Bovel, what else?
No, even in Yerushalayim, even though they were allowed to duchen, and even though they were allowed to eat truma d'rabbanan, or maybe even truma d'oraisa, but since they weren't allowed to eat kachim, which was something that's maybe gewinnt nisht, it's an unusual thing. That's why they weren't worried.
Why, when they came up, did they get in such a predicament?
Because Nehemiah said that whatever chazukah you have, godel. That's why Rabbi Yosy said godel chazukah. Even though they couldn't prove that they're kahanim because they didn't have a proper yichus brief, nevertheless, because of the chazukah, because until now they were duchening, until now they were eating truma d'rabbanan. The chazukah he let them continue, but he didn't let them act like full kahanim, so they were somewhere in the middle, and that's why we weren't worried that we would be malad and liyuchsin because they were in a funny status.
So the same thing as a woman, whatever issue.
The Gemara doesn't say it doesn't. The Gemara doesn't compare it to anything. The Gemara says this was a very unique situation. Yeah, the Gemara says a very unique situation. So the Gemara says, "Oh, I'm not on the right dot." I was wondering why the Gemara didn't look familiar. So the Gemara says,
"Well, the condition is working already."
So the Gemara says, not yet. So the Gemara says that the pasuk says something very interesting. It says Asher lo yochlu mikodesh hakadashim, and we learned that kodesh is referring to truma because it says v'chazor lo yochal kodesh, and we learned that kadashim is referring to kachim because it says uvaskoin kisiel lizar he betumas hakadashim lo soichal. V'amar mar we learned in Yevamis that it means b'murim and hakadashim lo soichal. We didn't see Rashi there. But Rashi tells us that's referring to the chaz of a sheikh. V'amar mar b'Yevamis, prepare Yesh Mataris, we learned recently.
Yes, I learned it yesterday with my son. In fact,
Bas Kohen, Shenisis li Yisrael, a Bas Kohen that married Yisrael, and then V'nas Salmano Grusha, V'zera Einla, where normally she goes back into her father's household to Truma, Shechazeres l'Trumas Beisavia, but the Eina Chazeres l'chaz of a sheikh. She doesn't eat the chaz of a sheikh anymore. Once she was married to Yisrael, even though she becomes al namana and she has no children, and she goes back into her father's household, and she could once again eat truma, chaz of a sheikh she can't eat. V'yalaf law mehaikra. You learn from this pasuk of kisiya leishzar he betrumas hakachim loy soichal oid. She's no longer ever allowed to eat trumas hakachim. So Chaim's asking if the air conditioner works again. The answer is no, but I don't know if you could see what it says over here. Can you see this? It says 3. So I have it in my pocket. I wish I had it in my pocket last night. Okay. Now I know why Nochem Ish Gamzu was the one who punished himself because he didn't have food in his pocket to give the Ani. Because if he had, the Ani wouldn't have died. He would have pulled it out right away. Just the time that it took to go to his tool bag and get it, hat him kala gemacht. Okay. Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter. I changed the clothing. Zok the Heilige Gemara. Zok the Heilige Gemara. Toshma. So we're discussing, I believe, the shaila whether or not if someone does Mesias Kapayim, could you automatically assume that he's a kosher kohen? So we're about 15 lines from the top of Daf Chafei Amaral. Toshma. Chazaka l'kahuna Mesias Kapayim beBavel. One of the ways you could know if someone's a kohen is if in Bavel he does Nesias Kapayim. Rashi says Chazaka l'kahuna l'hoyra l'avshu kohen is Nesias Kapayim beBavel. If you see that this person duchen in Bavel, made a love b'chal show koyin, then you could say edus on him anywhere that he's a koyin, umekabel heimenu, and they would accept it from the aid. L'vishiyesham yeshiva, because in Bavel there's a yeshiva, ubezin kavua, and a solid bezin, boitkin achenoisi kabayim, and therefore, before they let someone go to duchen in Bavel, Bezdin would check him out and make sure that he's a proper kohen. But if in Bavel you saw someone eating challah, and it doesn't mean challah of Shabbos, it means challah which is reishes or seichem, which every woman who makes challah has to be mafresh to give to the kohen. Or if you see that the kohen is eating truma, ain't a chazaka, that wouldn't be a raya that he's a kohen. The chutz la'aretz lav deraisa truma delay. The chiyuv truma in chutz la'aretz is not deraisa, but lekaptu kulahai, and therefore people aren't so makvid dafka that a kohen should eat it, and therefore the fact that someone's eating this in Bavel does not mean anything. But the fact that someone's duchening a Bavel, that means a lot, because Bezdin would make sure that such a person is a good kohen.
Achilles challah and Achilles trema, who knows what it is? Dichenem, you know for sure it is. When I see somebody eating a piece of bread, do I know what kind of?
So this is obviously speaking where you know he's eating it, and we're going to soon see the questions of achila means achila. If achila means that they're choylek in begronos, because eating it doesn't mean anything. It's the fact that it's given to him that's a raya. But we're going to see soon. V'achilas challah b'surya and v'chiluk matanos and matnas kahuna bekrachin in other cities. So let's see Rashi. V'achilas challah b'surya. What is Surya? He Aram Tzoiva, I believe that's Syria. Shekivsha David, even though it wasn't originally part of Eretz Yisrael, when David was expanding the borders of Eretz Yisrael, David took over Aram Tzoiva, the Chibra Eretz Yisrael, and he annexed it to be part of Eretz Yisrael. The Kesavar Haitana, and this Tana holds that Kibush Yochud Shemei Kibush. This Tana holds, we're going to soon see there's a machloikis, but this Tana holds that when a Yochid conquers land and connects it to Eretz Yisrael, it takes on the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore there'll be a Chiv Chala B'daraisa in Surya. So, Sovar Haitana Kibush Yochid Shmei Kibush V'cholsa V'chalosa U'trumasa Daraisa. And it's Chala and Truma Daraisa, V'kasol Kadaitach Tana Chala V'udin L'truma. And we also assume that if eating Chala is going to prove that someone's a kohen in Surya, who adin, if he was eating truma, that would also be a raya that he's a kohen. And v'chiluk matanos, our zuraya v'lachayim, is bekrachin in the cities. V'alva gav the isurin ein isur l'zorim, even though there's no isur for Yisrael to eat Israya l'chayim and the keva. Hoyel ukrachim mokim shvakim hein, since the krachim are places where there are markets. And there's many people who recognize him. If he wasn't a kohen, he wouldn't be so chutzpahdik to go and ask and take these roya l'chayim and keva from people who are shechting animals. So let's go back to analyze what we just learned. Nesias kapayim. If you see a kohen, a person who's duchening in Chutz La'aretz, you can assume he is a kohen. My lovely Yosy. So when the Brisa tells us that you can see someone duchening and you can prove him there is a kohen, legabe what does the Brisa mean to tell us? You can assume he's a kohen. Pashtus, it's liyuchsin. You can prove that he's a kohen miyuchis. So that proves our point. We had a shiloh whether or not Mylin Minasias Kapang Yosin. This Brisa seems to confirm that it does. So you don't have a raya. Loy l'truma. Maybe all the Brisa means is if you see someone in Bavel is duchening, you could give him truma. So Rashi loy l'truma harei knows a cup of a Bavel. Oyechel chala dafke b'Surya. If one sees somebody duchening a Bavel or eating challah in Surya, the heyed love Eretz Yisrael, and you went to a bezin in Eretz Yisrael and you said, I saw this person duchening a Bavel. I saw this person eating challah in Surya. Mekabel medusay lachila truma. They're mekabel edus and they're letting me truma, but that's just truma. Avaloy liyuchsin. So you don't have a raya that you're ma'ila kohen liyuchsin from the fact that he was duchening in Bavel. But you could bring a raya that he's halal truma. For the Gemara, it's not logical to suggest that because v'adomya dachilas chala katani. The Brisa listed off different ways to verify someone's a kohen, either if he's duchening in Bavel or if he's in chala in Surya. Well, what status do we confirm if you see that he ate chala in Surya? Ma achilas chala liyuchsin, just like when it says achilas chala, it's ma'ilahim liyuchsin. Why do we know it's liyuchsin? Zok Rashi, dila truma. If it just means that if he eats chala, you let him eat truma. Pshiti, he gufa truma. He chala has the same status as truma. So of course it's not saying if you see him eating truma, you can let him eat truma. Of course you can eat truma. The chiddush is you could even assume that he's kosher for yichus. So if that's the case, after sees kapayim. So in the same brisa, when the brisa says that you could bring a raya from the fact that he duchens, it's also liyuchsin. Because Pashas, the whole brisa is speaking about the same halacha. So Dr. Mar, no, loy achilas chala gufa l'truma. We're just saying that he can eat truma. Dr. Rashi, I'm sorry. Loy achilas chala gufa l'truma. Because sofer chala bizman hazeh derabanan. He holds that chala bizman hazeh is derabanan. So don't say that achilas chala is the same thing as truma. Rather, truma is a step up from achilas chala, because he holds that chala today is derabanan, utruma is deraisa, and the brisa is saying achilish umaskinan mechala derabanan letruma deraisa. And the chiddush of the brisa is that even though you're only eating now chala that's derabanan, will be machzik you to say they eat truma deraisa, but the yuchsin that not. So therefore, you don't have a raya. Zokt Rashi, umaskinim mechala derabanan. The lav kohen who, if he wasn't a kohen, will have a sofer lechala gzerim mishum truma. But once they give him chala, will also allow him to eat truma. Ucheta'afach lehu Rav Huna b'rei Rabbi Yeshua Rabbanan. Like Rav Huna b'rei Rabbi Yeshua argued on the Rabbanan, which we'll soon see. In fact, that chala is the Rabbanan, truma is the Raisa, because we're going to see later on that the Rabbanan said the opposite. That chala is the Raisa and truma is the Rabbanan. So that wouldn't fit, that shot wouldn't fit in here good. But according to the way of Huna b'rei Rabbi Yeshua learned, it'll fit in very nicely that achilas chala is the Rabbanan b'zman hazeh, and if you see someone eating chala, you'll also allow him to eat truma. Tashma. So let's try another raya. Chazaka l'kahuna, a chazaka to prove that someone's a kohen is nesias kapayim, is if you see that he duchens, v'chiluk granois, and if he goes to a goyred where people are giving out their trumas and maasros, if you see that he's receiving truma in Eretz Yisrael, that will prove that he's a kohen miyuchas. Let's see Rashi. Nesias kapayim v'chiluk granois the truma Eretz Yisrael. Noise kapayim, if he duchens in Eretz Yisrael, you know for sure he's a kohen. Because there's built the dinim in Eretz Yisrael that will make sure he's a proper kohen before they allow him to duchen. V'chiluk ranais, and the fact that people are giving him when he goes to the garden, they're giving him truma. Why is that a proof? Because at this point, the Gemara holds the truma b'zman hazeh deraisa. The Gemara holds the truma b'zman hazeh is deraisa. The chivin the avoin misa ika, since there's a chiv of misa b'dei shemayim. If a non-kohen eats truma, the fact that he's eating truma must be a really good proof that he's a real kohen, and therefore maskinon minali yuchsin. You could prove from the fact that he's eating truma that in fact he's a kohen miyuchas. Uvesurya, what about in Surya? Or uvechal mokim sheshluchei rosh chodesh magian, any place where the shluch rosh chodesh are magia. So we know the halacha is as soon as they make rosh chodesh, they send out shluchim to tell us that today's Rosh Chodesh. Now, where is it really relevant? It's relevant in Chodesh Nisan, so people should know which day to make Pesach. And in Chodesh Tishrei, people should know when to make Sukkot. And the halacha is any place where those shluchim reach on time for Yom Tov, those still have the status of Eretz Yisrael, and they only have to keep one day. Everywhere else, I believe they have to keep 2 days. So v'surya u'v'chalmokim sheshluchei chodesh megin, there the siyas kapayim raya. If they duchen, it'll be a raya. Avaloi chiluk granois, but chiluk granois will not be a raya. Ubovel kasurya, and Bavel is like Surya, meaning Nesis Kapayim is a raya, but not Chiluk Granis. Let's see Rashi. V'Surya v'chol mokim sheshluchei Eretz Yisrael magin lo'idiyah l'goyla, to announce and to notify those people who are not in Eretz Yisrael, Yom shekitchu bezdin es hachodesh, the day that Bezin were Mekadesh Chodesh Nisan, Lasos Pesach Bismanai, so they'll know which day is the first day of Pesach. The Hainu Hayoshvim Besoich Mahalach Hamishasayon. These are all people who live within a 15-day trip of Yerushalayim, of Eretz Yisrael. So there, Nesis Kapayim is a raya. In those cities, Nesis Kapayim is a raya. Levisha Bezdin Kavu Asham. There must be a solid Bezdin in each of those places. Shemekabel Shlichas Achodesh Ol Bezdin Agodol. They don't just come and hang up a sign in shul. They actually have to meet with a local Bezdin, say their edus that in Eretz Yisrael they declared Rosh Chodesh, and that has to be accepted by the local Bezdin. So the fact that there's a local Bezdin capable of accepting the message from these shluchim, that also tells us that they'll be able to make sure that only the appropriate people are duchening. And therefore, in those places, if you see someone duchening, you can assume he was cleared by Bezdin and he's a meyuchas. In those places, like Surya and all these other places where the messengers reach, that there, if they got truma in those places, it doesn't prove that they're actually kaihanim. The truma, the two lav deraisa, because truma is not deraisa in those areas. Uva Surya nami, even in Surya, truma is not deraisa. We said a moment ago that Surya, David captured and he made it part of Eretz Yisrael, and Surya now has the halachas of Eretz Yisrael. That was that Tana. But this Tana argues on the Tana we learned earlier. This Tana would hold that Surya is not considered part of Eretz Yisrael, even though David and Melech captured it. And therefore, it's no raya for each truma because the truma is only derabanan. There's a machlokes tanoim if the extra lands that were captured by David and Melech and he joined them and next them to Eretz Yisrael, if those are considered part of Eretz Yisrael instead of the kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, l'gabi truma. Okay, beautiful. Rab Shimon ben Gamliel says, Af Alexandria shel Mitzrayim, even in Alexandria shel Mitzrayim, I assume that means is like Bavel and Surya, where Chiluk Granish is not a raya, but maybe Nesis Kapayim is a raya. Barishoina, in the beginning, why? Because they also had a Bezdin in Alexandria shel Mitzrayim. Let's see if Rashi speaks. No, Rashi does not speak in Alexandria. So in the beginning, I'm not sure what the beginning period was, but there was a period of time where there were proper Batadinim in Mitzrayim, and therefore, if someone duchened, you can assume that they were a proper guy. Katanimios.
I saw why does the Torah reckon all the Masurs? Because there's the halucha that you're not allowed to go back to Mitzrayim, and there were so many Gedolim living there. So there of the shit that you're not allowed to go back exactly
the same route.
So then that's why Hashem writes the route.
Because that's the way that you're not allowed to go back. Really, there's such a sheet that holds you're only not allowed to go back to Mitzrayim if you follow the route.
And that's why I saw, yes.
The Rambam didn't hold it yet. Because the Rambam's signature was me, Moshe B'Maimin, who's over the Isser of going back to Mitzrayim every day. He actually put that into a signature, which is interesting because normally you don't advertise when you're doing something wrong. But I guess the Rambam held he was allowed to, but he wanted to make sure that it wouldn't become chulun to him. He wanted to still make sure to take it seriously.
And he came back.
Yeah. Katani Mias, I used to hear a class from a Chosh of a Dayan in New York. His name was Rav David Cohn. And he used to teach us, we were in a rabbinical training course for people who got Fahered on Yeridea. They had a class, once a week we had a class to train practical Rabbanim. So once in a while, the class was given by Rav David Cohn. So Rav David Cohn told us that he used to say a shir once a week for Rabbanim of Kehillas that weren't always fully Orthodox, a lot of Rabbanim from Long Island. So there's a lot of modern Orthodox that even move over into conservative and to reform Rabbanim in Long Island, and he used to give a shir for them once a week. So when congregation Simchas Torah was established, you know what congregation Simchas Torah is? In Manhattan, it's called Congregation Gay Torah. Simcha means gay, happiness. So when they established Congregation Simchas Torah in Manhattan, the week he gave a shir, the Rabbanim asked him, so what do you say about that? What do you say? What does Rabbi Cohen have to say about that? So he said, I told him, I don't understand what your problem is. You have people in your shuls who are Machal Shabbos, the Chayiv Skila. So they have people in their shul who are Machal Shabbos, who are Oiva Mishkav Zachar, so they're Chayiv Skila. So why is your shul any better than their shul? So he said that they were all very taken aback, like even almost offended, like, how could you compare us? But the Maisa, he had a good argument. But he said, don't worry, there's a very big difference. Because the name of your shul isn't Congregation Machal Shabbos, but their banner is Simchas Torah. For that, there's no redemption. Sure, Ayid is a very, so hopefully the Eden will come closer, you'll be Makar of them, they'll do Tshuva, they'll become Shem Shabbos. But if that's their claim to fame, that's irredeemable. Anyway, Dr. Markatani, we have over here a brisa. Nesias Kapayim, it says Nesias Kapayim. So my love, the same raya. Lo Yuchsin. What's the raya that the brisa refers to when it says you can bring a raya from the Nesias Kapayim? It's Lo Yuchsin. Zok Gemara Lo Lachala. It just means that if we see them duchening in these places, we will give them chala. For the Gemara, but Hadumya, the Chiluk Gronois Katani. Isn't the same status that we're giving Chiluk Gronois? Doesn't the brisa means to give that same status to the Noise Kapayim? Ma Chiluk Gronois Yuchsin. Just like Chiluk Gronois, there was Yuchsin, Af Nesias Kapayim Yuchsin. So Chiluk Gronois Gufa is Lechala. The fact that they're getting Truma will allow us to give them Chala. Exactly the opposite of what we learned earlier. Because this brisa holds, because of our Truma Bisman says the Rabbanon, and Chal is the Raisa. Umaskinim and Truma the Rabbanon, Lachal the Raisa. If we see that they're eating Truma the Rabbanon, then we'll say you can eat Chal the Raisa. But to be Maldam, Yuchsin, and Gantin, that we don't allow. And this is the Rabhuna Bered Rabbi Shua that we were talking about a moment ago, like the case where Rabhuna ben Rabbi Shua met Rabbanon. The Omar, and he said, Omar Rabhuna Bered Rabbi Shua, Ashke Chasinu Rabbanon beBeirav. I found the Rabbanon in Beirav, which Rashi says means the Besmedrish. The Yasid, the Kamri, they were sitting and talking, and they said as follows: Afilu Lamandamar Truma Bisman is at the Rabbanon. Even if you hold that Truma Bisman that says only with the Rabbanon, Chalus Daraisa. How do I know that Chalus Daraisa? Shrei Zayin Shekipshu V'Zayin Shechilku. After they came into Eretz Yisrael, there's 14 years until they were fully settled, because it took 7 years for them to conquer all of the different lands in Eretz Yisrael. And after they were all finally conquered, it took another 7 years to split up the land to each eat. And only then did they start counting the cycles of Shemitah. And when they started counting the cycles of Shemitah, Nischayvu B'Chala. That's when they started being Mechuyev in Chala. I'm sorry, that's when they started being Mechuyev in Truma. But during those 14 years, even before they started counting the cycle of Truma, of Shemitah, which started the Chiyuv of Truma as well, even before that, at the beginning of the 14 years, when they first got into Israel, right away there, they were already Mechuyev in Chala. But Nischayvu B'Truma. But they weren't chayiv in truma until the end of the 14 years. That's what the Rabbanon said, which means that in Chutz La'aretz there would be a chiyuv chalal deraisa, but not the Rabbanon. Ba'amina lehu ana, and I, Rab Huna Bered Rabbi Shua, told them it's exactly the opposite. Adrabah, afidu l'man damar truma b'zman hazeh deraisa. Even if truma b'zman hazeh deraisa, chalal is the Rabbanon. Titnan be learned. So let me just see Rashi on explaining the Rabbanon's side of the story. The Rabbanon said that Chala, they were Mechuyev as soon as they got into Yisrael, but Truma, they weren't Mechuyev until the end of the 14 years when they started counting the Truma cycles. So let's see Rashi on that. Nischayvu B'Chala. It says in the Torah, when are you being Mechuyev in Chala? B'Vayachem al Haaretz. When you get into Yisrael. Before you split it up, when you just get in. With Tanya B'Sefri, Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Shina Kosav Biazul, Mikol Biyasha B'Torah. The way the Torah explained this entering, this coming, is different than all the other places. Shebechulo Nemar, whenever the Torah is announcing the arrival, it says Kisavoyu or Kiyaviyacha. When you come, when Hashem brings you. The Khan, it says Bivayachem when you come. It's a different expression of coming into Eretz Yisrael, L'lam Lecha to teach you. Shekivin Shenichnasu Lo Nischayvu. that this chiyuv started immediately upon entering Eretz Yisrael, even before they did all the processing. But the Trumas and Maisers weren't mechuyev until 14 years later. The chsiv degoncha, your grain, tevuas haracha, meaning it grew by you in your personal space. Hamiyuchedes lach, which means you're not mechuyev until you have your dedicated, designated personal parcel of land, which didn't occur until 14 years later. V'oid sharechala hakosuf hamaiser b'minyan shnois hashmita. But tola hakosuf hamaiser b'minyan shnois hashmita. When the Torah explains the rules of meiser, the Torah connected it to the Shemitah years. The chsiv b'shon hashlishes shnas hamaiser. So when we say the third year you give Meiser Ani, that means the third year in the Shemitah cycle. So you see that giving Meiser at least is linked and dependent upon the Shemitah cycle. And they didn't start counting the Shemitah cycle until after all of the land was distributed. Okay, so this is already weiter. So the Rabbanan hold that the Chi of Chala was triggered the moment they came into Eretz Yisrael because of the unusual expression of Bivayachem, but the Chi of Trumas and Maisros didn't start until it was considered the Gancha and Tfus Aracha, until it was growing in your personal space, which means it must be after the land was distributed. That was one raya Rashi brings, and the other raya Rashi brings is the Chi of Maisros at least is linked to the year of the Shemitah cycle, so that means we couldn't have had a Chiv Meiser before the Shemitah cycle began. That was the Svar of the Rabbanan. But Rav Huna bar Yeshua said, Adarabba, afilu l'man damer truma b'zman hazeh deraisa, even if you hold today, truma deraisa, chala is the Rabbanan. Why? The Tanya says, b'vayachem el haaretz. When are you mechuyev in chala? When you come into Eretz Yisrael. If it just says b'vayachem, yochel mishenichnesu la shnayim u'shloshim meraglim. You would think when there's any limited level of entry, even if not all of Klal Yisrael is already in Eretz Yisrael, even when the Meraglim came, when there's only 2 or 3 Jews there, that's already called our arrival. And maybe at that point already there should be a chiyuv of chala. Talmud Lamer b'vayachem, all of you. Bevias kolchem amarti v'loi bevias miksaschem. The only time we mechuyev in chala is when all of Klal Yisrael is in Eretz Yisrael. But if not all of Klal Yisrael is in Eretz Yisrael, then there will be no chiyuv of chala.
What's the havamina that they should be mechuyev in chala? They were still eating the mun until they were mamish a day before they entered Eretz Yisrael. The Meraglim were like 38 years earlier.
Why is that a contradiction?
Because you're saying only the Meraglim would be mechuyev?
Or anybody in Eretz Yisrael.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
But not Klal Yisrael.
That's right. I would assume so. I think it's well, the truth of the matter is, I don't think the mitzvah of challah is a mitzvah tluya b'aretz.
Well, they weren't growing it. I don't know how they got their food, the Meraglim, in those 40 years, but it wasn't from their land that they grew the wheat and ate from it. Maybe they purchased.
Right, challah doesn't have to be grown from your land. It has to be our risoy seichem. But I don't know if it has to be grown on your land. If you buy flour in the store and you make your own flour, I think you'll also be mechuyev. You make your own dough, you'll also be mechuyev.
Possibly.
So when they came into Eretz Yisrael, they all had to come in. But that means he would agree that the chiv came right away. But you need to have them all there. The chiyaskinu Ezra, when Ezra came back to Eretz Yisrael, he did not bring all of Klal Yisrael with him, not even close to all of Klal Yisrael. Lav, one second, I don't have the right page here. Oh, I was hopping 2 pages together. Lav Kulu Solim. He didn't manage to bring all of Klal Yisrael with him. Rashi says, Ruban Nishru Bavel. Most of the Eden remained in Bavel. Dichsiv kol kol ke'echad. All of the people together was Abariba, was all of 40,000 people. So only a fraction of Klal Yisrael came back up. So there's a machlokes nowadays if there's a mitzvah of challah midaraisa in Eretz Yisrael. Rav Huna bar Yeshua holds there is no, because Klal Yisrael didn't come back. Only originally when they came into Eretz Yisrael, when they were all there, that's when there was a chi of challah. So therefore, Rav Huna bar Yeshua says exactly the opposite. That if you see someone eating challah, then you'll let him eat truma, because challah bismanazeh is the rabbanon and truma would be daraisa. So we're still unresolved. Could you prove if someone is noisek kapayim? Could you prove that it's a kohen miyuchas? The Gemara keeps on deflecting all of the rayas that you can prove something from the sis kapayim that it just means you let him eat truma, you let him eat challah. But we still have not resolved whether or not you can prove 100% that someone's a kohen miyuchas if he is duchening. So let's try another brayso. Chazaka lekahuna nesias kapayim. V'chila granois, which we know what those means already, and the edus. And in edus. Zokt Rashi, what does edus means? In bo edim shu koyin. If edim come and says that he's a koyin, shemakirin is over v'asimoy, that they recognize his mother and father. Frek the Gemara, edus chazakahi. You started the brayso with chazaka l'kahuna. Edus might prove he's a koyin. But where is there a chazaka? How is edus a chazaka? So Rashi edus chazaka bit me off. V'chi edus chazaka karila. Ela lav hachika amar. What it must be saying is nesias kapayim is ki edus. If you see someone duchening, it's as strong as a raya that he's a kohen miyuchis, just as if there were edim testifying on his lineage. Ma edus liyuchsin, just like edus, you can trust for yuchsin because they're actually saying, we know his father was a proper kohen. After sees kapayim liyuchsin. So from here you have a stronger raya that if you see someone duchening, you can assume he's a kosher kohen. So once again we're deflecting it. Edus haba mikoya chazaka chazaka. What the Bryce is saying is not an edus that's testifying that his parents are kohanim, and then you might have your raya. Rather, it just means if edus are only coming because of a chazaka, then it's a chazaka. What does it mean? Edus is coming because of a chazaka. Someone came to Rabami, and he said Edus. He said testimony in front of Rabami, and this is what he said: I'm sure about this man Ruvain. I'm sure that he's a kohen. Omer lay. So Rabami asked his aide, Ma rois. What did you see about him that you're so sure that he's a kohen? Omar lay, the aide said, Shekara Rishon beveis knesses becheska shu kohen. I saw that he got the aliyah of kohen in the city where I come from. I saw him there, and there they used to call him up as a kohen. That's how I saw that he was a kohen. So now this is an edus of a chazaka. It's not edus that can verify that his parents were kohanim. It's just not a chazaka that we see ourselves. It's a chazaka that we're only aware of because this aide told us that in this other city, this person always used to get kohen. Frek the Gemara, how do you know? Or the aide himself might have been saying, and how did I know? How did I know that the fact that he got the first aliyah proves that he was a kohen? Maybe he was a bim kohen. Maybe he was a very chushav erlechid. Oh, thank you so much. Maybe he was a very chushav erlechid, and there was no kohen around, so they gave the Yisrael, who was a great Yisrael. How do we know that he got the first aliyah because he was a kohen? Maybe he got it because he was a chushav. So to Gemara, Shekar Achar of Levi. You know how I know? Because if it was a bim kohen, then the next aliyah would have been the next erlechid. In him, they called him up. And after they called him up, then they called up a Levi. And that testimony was enough for Rab Ami to qualify him as a kohen. Ve'alu Rab Ami lekahuna alpiv. And Rab Huna made him the kohen. So this is what the brayso means, chazaka. If someone came along and said, Edus, they used to get an aliyah, that's enough to verify that he's a kohen, even though the Edom aren't directly testifying that they know he's a kohen. So this is very interesting, because if Vaisnach in those days, when the Gavoyim called you up, they didn't call you up Chaim ben Yankel HaKohen. Because if that's the case, he could have said they called him up as Kohen. His only raya was from the fact that they called a Levi afterwards. Like, otherwise, from calling up alone, it should be enough. Thank you very much, Chaim.
See, he's a lot more of a Shalim, so he can't bring.
Amen.
This
Amen.
is full of spring, he can bring.
Edus haba mikay chazaka zok Rashi. Ha'edus nekabel will accept it. V'nachiloi betruma and will allow him to truma ki ilu ra'inu anan loisa chazaka shezaheid. When someone says testimony that he was fearing zich like a kohen, we could assume that we saw that as well. Oy bechezka shu gadol kedamin be'alma Rav Kori bechahani ba'avagav lav kohen. They used to call up Rav for kohen, even though Rav wasn't a kohen. Shakar Achal of Levi, the raya is that they called a Levi after him. Vilav Koinu, if he was not a Kohen, he was only a Gavar Rabbah, and that's why he got the first Aliyah. Ain Levi Kaira Acharav. You're Bedafka not allowed to call a Levi. Whenever you call a Bim Kohen, you're not allowed to call a Kohen a Levi next. That's our meaning as well. Once you have a Bim Kohen and you call Yisrael Bim Kohen, you no longer are allowed to call up a Levi for Sheni. Why not? Once there's no coin, nisbar the chavila. The bundle falls apart. In other words, we no longer follow the same seder of Elias. And we explain the ein levi kairei b'mokim shein koin. Once the Rishon was a Yisrael, the Levi is no longer allowed to get the second Aliyah. V'yesh mefarshim nisbar da chavila. Now those who learn nisbar da chavila is she'b'mokim shein koin. If there's no koin, im roitza Yisrael likrois lefnei levi kairei. If a Yisrael wants to get the first Aliyah, the Levi could still get the second Aliyah. But v'dafka the ancient coin. The only time you might allow a Levi to get Sheni is only if there was no coin. But if there is a coin, then the bundle didn't fall apart. Yisrael gadol lefnei Levi. And they're not allowed to, if there's a coin around, you're not allowed to call a Yisrael gadol before a Levi. V'hacha Koyin acher hava, awesome. Here there was another koyin in the Besmedrash, and they still called the koyin first and then a Levi. They still called him first and then a Levi. So it must be that the first Aliyah was a koyin. Hilchach, ilav the high koyin hava. If this first person who got Aliyah, if he wasn't a koyin, they have a Levi kari abasrei. You wouldn't have been able to call a Levi after him. Okay, gewaltig. So there's a shaila. There's a shiloh over here. Again, let's hear Rashi again. There's a shiloh in here of how this works. So Nachmal, Shekar Achav Levi Vilav Koinu and Levi Kair Achav. They couldn't have had a Levi get the second Aliyah unless the first Aliyah was a Koin. The Rimbus Achasgitin the Mensham Koin is part of Chavila. If there's no Koin, you don't follow the rules anymore. Umafarshinan the in Levi Kair B'Makam Shem Koin. So there's one pshat who learns that when there's no Koin, you're never allowed to have a Levi get an Aliyah at all. So the fact that the Levi got an Aliyah, that's right. If the Kohen didn't get Rishon, then the Levi is not allowed to get Sheni.
But he could get Rishon.
The Levi could get Rishon, correct. But it was this Yid who got Rishon, and the Levi got after him, so it proves that he was a Kohen. But V'yesh Mefarshim, there's another pshat about the halacha of what happens. The Sparda Chavila is b'mokim she'ein Kohen imroitz the Yisrael likrois lefnei Levi kairei. There's another pshat who learns that if there's no Kohen, then the Yisrael can get first, and the Levi could go after him. The davka the ancient coin, davka if there's no coin. Aval heicha the eagle coin, non is parda chavila. V'lo yikra Yisrael gadol l'fnei Levi. And a Yisrael shouldn't get in front of a Levi. So in the second shot is v'yesh mefarshim sh'ayl chemlin shebamokam shein coin davka if there's no coin. If a Yisrael wants to get his Aliyah before the Levi, he can get. Meaning. You would give a Levi if there was no other coin there. Then you would give a Yisrael first and then a Levi second. But here there was a coin, but that's not an ancient coin. The eagle coin. But if there was a coin there, then learn Yispar Dachavila. But loikri Yisrael Gadol Lefnei Levi. Then you wouldn't be able to call Yisrael Gadol Lefnei Levi. But there was a coin there, and since there was a coin there, and we still gave and we still gave him an Aliyah and a Levi afterwards. That's already a raya that he must have been a coin. Sorry?
Rashi says that du gewinnt zwei Kohen. So the fact
No, there wasn't a
that
coin. There was him and another coin. So the fact that he got the Aliyah and the Levi still got after him is a right that he must have been a coin.
If not, then the other coin would get on.
It's mashma from here. It's mashma from here that if you gave a Yisrael als Godel, if you gave him als Yisrael Godel, right? Even though there was another coin there, you wouldn't have had a Levi after. You only have a Levi after him if it was a Kohen first.
The raya is from the second Kohen also.
That's right.
So we have two
That's right.
Kohanim, him and somebody else, and the other Kohen didn't get it. He got it. So the simon that he's a Kohen.
That's right. Okay, gewaltig. Zog the Gebar. So look to where we're up to. So how do you know? Maybe it was Becheskel Shugadol. So that's the brayso that says that there's a third method of verifying he's a Kohen, even if we don't know, even if Bezin doesn't know that he duchen elsewhere. If we only have an aid that he got Kohen elsewhere, that's good enough of a right. Who does look at Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi? Somebody came to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. He told Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, I know about this gentleman, Shu Levi, that he's a Levi. Amalei Marois. What did you see that he's a Levi? Because he got the second aliyah Becheska Shu Levi. Maybe Becheska Shu Godol. Maybe he got it because he was the Achoshev Yid. Zok Gemara Shekar Lefan of Kohen. No. They had already had a Kohen before him. And Raj says, V'milav, the high Levi who, if it wasn't for the fact that he was a Levi, Lahaya Kair Sheni, El Shlishi. If he was a Yisrael, that it was a big Talmid Chacham, Achoshev Yid, and he wanted to get a Choshev Aliyah, he would never get Sheni. If there was a Kohen with Rishon, he would have only gotten Shlishi. Shnayim Kayhanim Hayukarin Lefanav, who Shlishi, and he would have been the third. The Hakam Rinu B'Mesechus Gittin and Me'enshem Levi Kaira Kohen B'M Kohen. But even if there's no Levi there would be the Kohen gets an Aliyah B'M Kohen Levi. So Zakimor, so how do you know? Since the Kohen lane before him, it must be that the second guy was a Levi. And what does it mean? They were Oilam Levia. Rashi's losses like Ma'aser Rishon. Rabbi Shua ben Levi said, you can give this person Ma'aser Rishon. Who does like Kamei Shlokish? Someone came in front of our Shlokish.
How did they give to Kayhan before?
If there's no Levi, Levi.
Right, but you don't do that because then you make a shal on the first.
No, the first coin will get the second aliyah.
Right, but the rest
I hear. I'm not sure if that tafka maybe means you. I don't know. I'm not sure. That's a good question. Okay, talking more weiter. Who does not come with their shlokish? I know about Reuven Chukain. Amalei Marois. How do you know? Amalei Shekar Rishon B'Besek Knesses. Amalei Reisiv Shechila Chal Granos. Okay, you saw him get an aliyah. Big deal. Anybody can get an aliyah. It's not a big peril. But did you see that he got truma? So Amalei Rabbi Elazar popped in and told Rish Lakish, "V'im Einshem Geirin Batla Kahuna." Are you telling me that if there's no Geirin, for instance, let's say it's an industrial city where people don't plant, so truma is not relevant. So you're going to tell me there's no kahuna anymore in an industrial city where there's no trumas and ma'asos going on? Are you telling me there's no kahuna anymore? And you could never verify someone's a kohen because no one's able to verify that he got truma? That's not a fair argument, because in all industrial cities there'll be no more kahana. So who piped in to argue with Rish Lakish? Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar was a young guy. Zimnin Yosy Kamei Rabbi Yochanan. There was once a time where they were all sitting in front of Rabbi Yochanan the Great. Also, I'm sorry? That's correct. That's great. Also, and the same story happened. Amar le Rish Lakish, and Rish Lakish told him, Rish Lakish asked the same question. Can you verify someone's a kohen just because he got the aliyah of kohen? Did you see that he got truma? And Rabbi Yochanan responded, Amalei Rabbi Yochanan, v'meinshem garim batla kahuna. So in an industrial city where there's no planting, are you going to tell me that there'll be no more kahuna? So then Rish Lakish chapped, Rabbi Elazar, this wasn't your taina. You heard Rabbi Yochanan say it, and you repeated it to me. That's not right of you. What you should have done is you should have told me Rabbi Yochanan argues on you, and Rabbi Yochanan has this taina of v'meinshem garim. I brushed you off. I didn't take you seriously. But had I known that it was Rabbi Yochanan who said this taina, of course I would have accepted it. So I'm upset with you that you didn't quote Rabbi Yochanan. Hadr Chazir le Rabbi Elazar Bishos. Rish Lakish gave Rabbi Elazar a dirty look. Omar Shmat Mili Devar Nafcha. You heard the holy words of Rabbi Yochanan, who was the son of a blacksmith. V'loy Amrit Lon Mishmei, and you didn't tell me that this came from Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Chia.
Why did he call him Bar Nafcha? Bar Nafcha is not such a...
I don't know. There's Torah on it, but Fakert, he's a big Talmud Chacham, and his father worked hard that he should be able to go to yeshiva. That's a plus, maybe, but I don't know. Rabbi Chia, Chad Hela ben Al Pi Aviv Lakuna. One of this group was verified a son to be a kohen based on his father's testimony. My son's a kohen. The Chad Hela Ach Al Pi Achav Lilavia, and another one of the two. One brother said, "Hey, this on his other brother. My brother's a Levi," and he accepted that and made him to a Levi. We don't know who paskined what. Tistayim. Let's see if we could bring a raya. The Rav Hela ben Al Pi Aviv Lakuna, and then by process of elimination, we'll know that Reb Chia was Maila Ach Al Pi Achav Lilavia. The Tanya. Hareisha Bava Omar Benizeh. If someone came along and said, "This is my son," v'choy and he's a choy, nemon lachile b'truma. The fathers believe that the son can eat truma, but ve'enoi nemon lahasiya isha. But the father's not nemon to make him into a kohen miyuchis to that they could marry a woman who's miyucheses. Divrei Rebbe, Amar lo Reb Chia told him, "I don't understand. If you're believing the father, and because of that you're letting the child eat truma, taminoi lasiya isha. Why don't you trust him completely and let him marry a kosher woman? Either believe him or don't believe him." So Rebbe answered, why do I believe him to be machal b'truma? He's a kohen himself. He has truma. He could take truma and give it to a son. So since he could do it, we trust him that a son could do it. But I'm not believing him that he should become a miyuchis. He can't force anyone to marry her. So therefore he doesn't have an amanus. He only has an amanus for things that he could do anyway, whether we believe him or not. So therefore it is time. So now we've proven that it was Rebbe who trusted a father to be miyachis his son, l'gabi eating truma. Since Rebbe is the one who trusted a father to make a child into a kohen, so by process of elimination,
How then should a person become a kohen miyuchis if not when he's born and the father said,
we're talking about a father and a son who came to a different city that nobody knew of him from before, and he said that. So we're not talking about someone who they know the lineage from before. Reb Chia, Ma'ishna ben Deloy, the Karfu Eitzel Aviv. Reb Chia held that we don't trust the father to say that the son is a kohen because he's a karev. Ach nami karvu Eitzel Aviv. So why is a brother any different? Is also.
You see that Reb Chia did because he asked Rebbe. Why don't you?
No, he asked him a munavshach, but he didn't say that he held him may. Maybe he holds completely no. But he is asking Rebbe, you're a steer bay, other not to this. So Zoktamar, why did Levi believe his brother? Zoktamar, there it was Messiach Lefitumai. Messiach Lefitumai means he happened to have mentioned it, but he was not saying B'taras Eidos. So there's a greater namadnus, which the Gemara will go into in more detail tomorrow.
You said you wanted to continue a little bit.
I know, but it's already late. But I just want to look at Tosfos a little bit, because Tosfos asks, why don't you believe him with a migo? Migo, he could have said it's not my son, and he's not related to me, and he could have said Tamanedus. We know an Eirech is never to say that someone's a kohen. So the fact that he said it's his son, why doesn't he have a migo? Even though it's a migo, loy meheman. Why? Because the ledvarav karefu. At the end of the day, even with the migo, he's still a karev, and therefore a karev be'etzem is possible, and the person is not neman. But what it must mean over here is like what you said. If he's huchshak without the father, then avada we don't need the father's ages. It must be that he's coming from out of town and he's saying that my son's a kohen. So he's not even maxing himself, right? He can't say this himself, but maybe he could say the yeners. Okay, so we'll stop here, and the mission will be mamshich tomorrow.
So guys, I'm waiting to get if we're talking about Eidos, right?
Right.
That could have been